I never thought I would be standing in front of a judge defending myself against a lawsuit because my own homeowners association decided to turn my private property into a public park. But there I was, watching my lawyer shuffle through documents while a woman with bandages on her arm glared at me from across the courtroom like I had personally pushed her down the stairs. My name is Lucas Warren, and I had purchased my dream property in Scottsdale, Arizona 3 years ago. It was a beautiful 5-acre estate with a private gate, a long, winding driveway lined with desert willows, and a custom-built home that overlooked the McDowell Mountains. The property had everything I wanted: privacy, security, and enough space that I never had to worry about neighbors peering over my fence. The gated entrance was controlled by a keypad system that only I, my family, and authorized guests could access. It was perfect, or at least it was until Patricia Henderson became president of the Sonoran Vista Homeowners Association. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone said HOA president on a power trip. She was 52 years old, had short blonde hair that she kept in that aggressive Karen-style haircut, and she wore those chunky statement necklaces that seemed to give her some kind of false authority. From the moment she took over the HOA board, she made it her personal mission to control every aspect of our neighborhood, from the exact shade of beige you could paint your house to whether or not you could have a basketball hoop in your driveway. The problem started in March of 2025. I came home from work one Tuesday afternoon and noticed that my gate was standing wide open. Not just unlocked, but propped open with a large decorative stone that definitely did not belong to me. I got out of my truck and walked over to examine it, confused about how this could have happened. The keypad looked fine, no signs of damage or tampering, but the gate was clearly open for anyone to access my property. I grabbed the stone and tossed it aside, then closed the gate and punched in my code to make sure everything was working. The mechanism seemed fine. I figured maybe the landscaping crew I had hired the week before had left it open accidentally, even though I had specifically told them to make sure it closed behind them. I made a mental note to call them and remind them about security, then drove up to my house and forgot about it. 2 days later, it happened again. This time when I came home, there were actually people on my property. A couple with 2 kids were walking down my driveway, and the children were throwing rocks into the small decorative pond I had installed near the entrance. I stopped my truck and rolled down the window. "Excuse me, this is private property," I called out, trying to keep my tone friendly but firm. The man looked up, startled. "Oh, sorry. We thought this was the community nature trail. The gate was open." "There is no community nature trail. This is my driveway, my private property. The gate should not be open." The woman picked up one of the kids and started walking toward the gate. "We are so sorry. Someone told us at the HOA meeting that there was a new walking path through here. We must have gotten the wrong information." I felt my stomach drop. What HOA meeting? The one last week. Patricia Henderson mentioned something about new community access points. We are new to the neighborhood, so we are still learning where everything is. I thanked them for understanding and watched as they left, then immediately drove up to my house and pulled up the HOA meeting minutes online. Sure enough, buried in the notes from the March meeting was a line that read, "Discussion of community walking paths and shared green spaces. Motion to explore underutilized private gates for neighborhood access, passed 4-1. I grabbed my phone and called Patricia directly. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Lucas, how nice to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "Patricia, can you explain to me why my gate has been propped open and people are walking through my private property?" There was a pause. "Oh, that. Yes, the board voted to improve community connectivity. Your gate provides access to a lovely walking route that connects to the public trails behind your property. We thought it would be a wonderful amenity for the neighborhood." I could not believe what I was hearing. "Patricia, that is my private property. You cannot just open my gate and let people wander through. That is trespassing." "Actually, Lucas, if you read your HOA covenants, you will see that the association has the right to utilize private property for community benefit under Section 12, Paragraph 4. We sent out an email notification 2 weeks ago." "I never got any email, and I never agreed to this. Close my gate and keep it closed. or I will take legal action." She sighed like I was a difficult child. "Lucas, you're being unreasonable. This is for the good of the community. But fine, I will have someone close the gate. However, I should warn you that the board may need to issue fines if you continue to obstruct community initiatives." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there in my truck, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. I immediately went back and read through every single page of my HOA covenants, all 73 pages of legal jargon. Section 12, paragraph 4, mentioned something about easements and community access, but it specifically referred to utility access and emergency services, not recreational walking paths through someone's front yard. For a few days, things seemed to return to normal. The gate stayed closed, and I started to think maybe Patricia had backed down. I should have known better. The following Monday, I worked from home. Around 10 in the morning, I heard voices outside. I looked out my front window and saw at least a dozen people walking up my driveway. Some were in workout clothes, clearly using my property as part of their morning exercise routine. Others were walking dogs, and one couple had stopped to take selfies in front of my house. I ran outside. "Hey, what are you all doing here?" An older woman in a purple tracksuit smiled at me. "Good morning. Beautiful property you have here. Patricia said the morning walking group could use this route now." "Patricia does not have the authority to do that. This is private property. You all need to leave." A man with a golden retriever shook his head. "Look, buddy, we were told this is part of the HOA community space now. If you have a problem with it, take it up with the board." "I am taking it up with you. Get off my property now." Most of them left, grumbling about me being unfriendly and unwelcoming, but I noticed the gate was once again propped open with a stone. This time, there was also a small wooden sign posted next to it that read, "Sonoran Vista Community Trail. Please stay on path." I ripped the sign out of the ground and threw it into my truck bed, then spent 20 minutes searching for whatever was keeping the gate open. I finally found a small wedge that had been jammed into the gate mechanism itself, preventing it from closing properly. Someone had deliberately sabotaged my gate. I called an emergency locksmith and had them install a new system that would automatically close the gate every 30 seconds, with a backup battery system in case someone tried to cut the power. It cost me $800, but I figured it was worth it for peace of mind. The next morning, I woke up to find an official-looking letter from the HOA in my mailbox. It was a notice of violation, citing me for removing community signage and obstructing neighborhood access points. The fine was $500, with an additional $100 per day until I came into compliance. I called my real estate attorney, David Moss, and explained the entire situation. He listened carefully, asked several questions about the HOA covenants, and then told me he would send a cease and desist letter to Patricia and the HOA board. "This is pretty clear-cut, Lucas," he said. "They have no legal right to convert your private property into a public walkway without your consent. The covenant language they are citing does not apply to this situation. I will draft something strong and get it sent out today." I felt relieved, thinking this nightmare would finally end. The cease and desist went out on Wednesday. By Friday, I received a response from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Richard Paulson, who apparently specialized in HOA law. His letter was 3 pages of legal threats, claiming that I was violating community standards, that my hostile attitude was creating a negative environment, and that the HOA had every right to manage neighborhood amenities as they saw fit. David was stunned when he read it. "This is insane. Their lawyer is either completely incompetent or deliberately misleading them. You have a strong case if you want to file a lawsuit against the HOA." "I just want them to leave my property alone. I do not want to spend months in court." "I understand, but they are not backing down. My advice is to document everything, take photos, save emails, keep records of every interaction. If this escalates, you will need evidence." I took his advice. I installed security cameras at my gate and along my driveway, positioned to capture anyone who entered my property. I kept a detailed log of every incident, every phone call, every letter. I also started attending HOA board meetings, which I had previously ignored because they seemed like a waste of time. The meetings were worse than I imagined. Patricia ran them like a dictator, cutting people off mid-sentence if they disagreed with her, and the rest of the board members seemed either too intimidated or too apathetic to challenge her. There were 4 other board members: Frank Moretti, who owned a plumbing business and seemed to vote yes on everything Patricia proposed; Susan Chen, who at least tried to ask questions but always got shut down; Gregory Walsh, who spent most meetings looking at his phone; and Denise Cartwright, who was apparently Patricia's best friend and backed up everything she said. At the April meeting, I stood up during the open comment period and addressed the board directly. I am here to formally request that the HOA stop encouraging people to trespass on my property. The so-called community walking trail goes through my private land, and I have not consented to this use. I have installed security cameras, and I will be pressing charges against anyone who continues to trespass. Patricia smiled, that tight, condescending smile. Lucas, we have been over this. The community has voted to expand walking access, and your property provides a valuable connection point. You are being selfish by blocking access. It is not selfish to expect privacy on property I own and pay for. You do not have an easement, you do not have permission, and you need to stop. Frank leaned forward. Look, Warren, we are trying to improve property values for everyone. A connected community with walking trails is attractive to buyers. You should be thanking us. I will thank you when you stop breaking the law, Susan spoke up quietly. Patricia, did we actually verify the legal language before implementing this? I remember having concerns about the liability. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. Our attorney reviewed everything. It's all perfectly legal. Lucas is just being difficult because he does not want to be a team player. Your attorney is wrong, and so are you. I am giving you formal notice right now in front of witnesses that if anyone enters my property without my permission, I will have them arrested for trespassing, and I will sue the HOA for any damages. I sat down, my heart pounding. The meeting continued, but I could feel Patricia's eyes on me for the rest of the evening. After it ended, she approached me in the parking lot. You are making a big mistake, Lucas. The HOA has a lot of power, and we can make your life very difficult if you continue to fight us on this. Is that a threat? It is a warning. We have ways of dealing with homeowners who do not follow the rules. She walked away before I could respond. I got in my truck and drove home, feeling both angry and anxious. This had gone way beyond a simple property dispute. Patricia seemed personally invested in making me comply, and I could not understand why. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. I started receiving violation notices for increasingly absurd things. My mailbox was supposedly the wrong shade of black, my trash cans were visible from the street for excessive periods, and my landscaping was not consistent with community standards, even though I had just paid a professional company to completely redo it according to HOA guidelines. Each violation came with a fine, and the fines started adding up. I disputed every single one through the formal HOA appeals process, but Patricia and her allies on the board denied every appeal. I was now looking at over $3,000 in bogus fines, and my lawyer was telling me I would need to take them to court to fight it. But the property access issue was the main battle. Despite my new gate system, despite the cameras, despite my repeated complaints, people kept showing up on my property. I would see them on the camera footage, walking up my driveway, letting their dogs defecate on my landscaping, and treating my private land like a public park. The gate was getting forced open somehow, and I suspected Patricia or one of her allies was giving people the access code. I changed the code 3 times in 2 weeks. Each time, within a day or two, people would start showing up again. Someone on the inside had to be sharing the information. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning in early May, and I was in my garage working on a woodworking project when I heard shouting outside. I walked down my driveway and saw a crowd gathered near my gate. As I got closer, I saw a woman sitting on the ground, clutching her leg, while several people stood around her, looking panicked. "What happened?" I asked, jogging over. A man in his 30s turned to me. "She tripped on one of those rocks and fell. I think her leg might be broken." The woman on the ground was crying, her face pale. I immediately called 911 and gave them my address. While we waited for the ambulance, I tried to help keep her calm and asked what had happened. Between sobs, she explained that she was part of the weekend walking group that Patricia had organized. They had been walking through my property when she caught her foot on a loose stone near the drainage area by my pond and went down hard. Her name was Michelle Carter, and she lived 4 streets over. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. The paramedics examined her and determined she had likely fractured her tibia. They loaded her onto a stretcher and took her to the hospital. Before they left, one of the paramedics asked me if I was the property owner. "Yes, this is my property." He nodded and made a note on his clipboard. "The hospital will probably follow up with you. Anytime there's an injury on private property, there are liability questions." My stomach sank. I'd been so focused on helping Michelle that I had not thought about the legal implications. As the ambulance drove away, the crowd dispersed, and I was left standing at my gate, trying to process what had just happened. I immediately called David. It was Saturday morning, but he picked up anyway. "David, someone just got hurt on my property. A woman from the HOA walking group fell and broke her leg." "Okay, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened." I explained the entire situation, including the fact that she had been trespassing at Patricia's encouragement. David was quiet for a moment. "This is going to get complicated. Even though she was trespassing, property owners have a duty to maintain safe conditions. If there was a hazard on your property that caused her injury, she could potentially sue you. But she should not have been there in the first place. I know, and that is your defense, but personal injury cases are not always straightforward. You need to document everything right now. Take photos of the area where she fell, preserve your camera footage showing she was trespassing, and gather any evidence you have that shows the HOA encouraged this access." I spent the rest of the day doing exactly that. I photographed every inch of the area near the pond, paying special attention to the stones and the drainage. The area looked normal to me, just a natural landscape feature. There were no hidden holes, no dangerously loose rocks, nothing that would constitute a hazard. She had simply been walking through an area that was not designed as a walking path and had been unfortunate enough to catch her foot wrong. On Monday morning, I received a letter from a personal injury attorney representing Michelle Carter. The letter informed me that Ms. Carter had suffered a serious injury on my property due to negligent maintenance and hazardous conditions. They were demanding that my homeowner's insurance cover her medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering. The estimated damages were over $200,000. I immediately forwarded the letter to my insurance company and called David again. He reviewed the demand letter and shook his head. "They are going after you hard. This is a serious lawsuit." "What do I do?" "Your insurance company will assign you a defense attorney. Let them handle the legal side. But Lucas, I need to be honest with you. Even though you have a strong trespassing defense, juries can be sympathetic to injury victims. If this goes to trial, it could go either way." The insurance company did assign me an attorney, a sharp woman named Barbara Daniels, who specialized in premises liability cases. She reviewed all my evidence, including the camera footage showing dozens of trespassers over the previous months, all encouraged by Patricia and the HOA. "This is actually helpful," Barbara said during our first meeting. "We can argue that you took reasonable steps to keep trespassers out, but the HOA actively undermined your security measures. In fact, you might have grounds for a third-party claim against the HOA itself." Can we do that? Absolutely. If we can prove the HOA deliberately caused this situation by encouraging people to trespass, they could be held liable for Ms. Carter's injuries. Let me draft something, and we will see how they respond. Barbara filed a motion to add the Sonoran Vista HOA as a co-defendant in the lawsuit, arguing that Patricia and the board had created the dangerous situation by converting my private property into an unauthorized walking trail. She attached all my documentation, the emails, the meeting minutes, the violation notices, everything. The response from the HOA was swift and vicious. They filed a counterclaim against me for harassment, defamation, and intentional interference with community operations. They also claimed that I had created the hazardous condition by improperly maintaining the landscape, and that Michelle's injury was entirely my fault. We were now in a full-blown legal war. The deposition started in June. I had to sit in a conference room and answer questions from Michelle's attorney for 4 hours, while a court reporter typed every word. They asked me about every aspect of my property maintenance, my relationship with the HOA, my attempts to keep people out, everything. Then came Patricia's deposition. Barbara had me sit in on it, and it was one of the most satisfying experiences of my life. Patricia showed up dressed like she was going to a business meeting, wearing a blazer and carrying a leather portfolio. She sat down across from Barbara with a confident expression that quickly faded as the questions started. "Ms. Henderson, did you encourage HOA members to access Mr. Warren's private property?" "I encouraged community connectivity, yes." "Did Mr. Warren give you permission to direct people onto his property?" "The HOA covenants give us the authority to manage community spaces." "Is Mr. Warren's private driveway a community space?" Patricia hesitated. "We determined it could serve that function." "Based on what legal authority?" "Our attorney advised us it was within our rights." "Do you have that advice in writing?" Another hesitation. "I would have to check." Barbara pulled out a document. "Ms. Henderson, this is an email you sent to the HOA board on March 15th. In it, you state, and I quote, 'Lucas Warren is being unreasonable about sharing his gate access. I think we should just open it anyway and deal with his complaints later.'" "Did you write this email?" Patricia's face went red. That was taken out of context. What context would make it acceptable to deliberately trespass on someone's property? "We were trying to improve the neighborhood." The deposition continued for another 3 hours. By the end, Patricia was flustered and defensive, and Barbara had gotten her to admit several damaging facts: that she had never obtained my permission, that she had given my gate code to numerous residents, that she had actively encouraged people to access my property despite my objections, and that she had retaliated against me with violation notices when I complained. Frank, Susan, and Denise were also deposed. Susan, to her credit, admitted that she had raised concerns about the legality of the walking trail, but had been overruled by Patricia. Frank and Denise both tried to defend Patricia's actions, but their testimony was inconsistent and unhelpful. By August, Michelle's attorney approached Barbara with a settlement offer. They would drop the lawsuit against me entirely if I agreed to split the settlement cost with the HOA. They wanted $150,000 total, with each party paying half. I refused. Barbara supported my decision and told Michelle's attorney that we were prepared to go to trial. We had strong evidence that Michelle had been trespassing and that the HOA, not me, was responsible for creating the situation that led to her injury. The case was scheduled for trial in October. As we got closer to the date, the pressure mounted. The HOA hired a new attorney, a more experienced litigator who tried to negotiate a settlement with Barbara. They offered to pay $75,000 to Michelle if I would drop my claims against the HOA and agree to pay the remaining $75,000. Again, I refused. I was not paying a cent for an injury that happened because Patricia decided to turn my property into a public park against my will. Then, things took an unexpected turn. Susan Chen, the board member who had expressed concerns about the trail, reached out to me directly. She asked if we could meet for coffee, and I agreed, curious about what she wanted. We met at a Starbucks in downtown Scottsdale. Susan looked nervous, constantly glancing around like she was afraid someone would see us together. "Lucas, I need to tell you something, but I need you to promise it stays between us for now." "Okay." "Patricia has been doing things without the full board's knowledge. She has been accessing HOA funds without proper authorization, and she has been making decisions that the rest of us never voted on. This whole thing with your property, the walking trail, it was never officially approved. She just put it in the meeting minutes after the fact." I leaned forward. "Do you have proof of this?" "I have emails, financial records, everything. I've been documenting it because I knew something was wrong. But I was scared to come forward because Patricia is vindictive. You have seen how she treats people who disagree with her. Why are you telling me now?" "Because an innocent woman got hurt, and this whole situation has gotten out of control. Patricia is trying to use HOA funds to pay for the settlement and the legal fees, and that money comes from all the homeowners, including me. It is not right. She created this mess, and she should be held accountable." Susan gave me copies of everything she had gathered. The documents showed that Patricia had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom for the past 2 years. She had approved contracts without board votes, paid herself questionable consulting fees, and made unilateral decisions about community funds. The evidence about my property was particularly damning. There had never been an official vote to create the walking trail. Patricia had simply written it into the meeting minutes and claimed it had been approved. When I had filed my first complaint, she had deleted emails and altered records to cover her tracks. I took everything to Barbara, who immediately recognized the significance. This changes everything. If Patricia was acting outside her authority, the HOA can argue they are not liable because she was exceeding her role. But more importantly, this shows fraud and misconduct. We need to bring this to the judge's attention. Barbara filed an emergency motion to admit the new evidence. The judge agreed to review it and scheduled a hearing for the following week. At the hearing, Susan testified about Patricia's pattern of misconduct and provided the documentary evidence to support it. Patricia's attorney tried to discredit Susan, but the documents spoke for themselves. The judge was clearly troubled by what he heard. "Ms. Henderson, these allegations are very serious. Did you or did you not have board authorization to open Mr. Warren's gate to community access?" Patricia stammered. "Your Honor, I was acting in what I believe to be the best interests of the community." "That is not what I asked. Did you have authorization?" "The board supported community initiatives." "Yes or no, Ms. Henderson?" Patricia looked at her attorney, who nodded reluctantly. "No, Your Honor, not a formal vote." The judge made some notes. "We will continue this hearing next week. In the meantime, I am ordering a full audit of the HOA's financial records and governance procedures. Ms. Henderson, you are temporarily removed from your position as HOA president pending the outcome of this investigation." Patricia looked like she had been slapped. She started to argue, but her attorney put a hand on her arm to quiet her. Over the next few weeks, the full extent of Patricia's misconduct came to light. The audit revealed that she had misappropriated over $40,000 in HOA funds for personal expenses. She had been submitting fake invoices for community improvements that never happened and paying herself excessive fees for administrative work that was supposed to be volunteer-based. The HOA's insurance company got involved, and they immediately moved to settle with Michelle Carter, arguing that Patricia's fraud and misconduct fell outside the scope of their policy. Michelle's attorney, seeing that the case was falling apart, agreed to accept $80,000 from Patricia personally and dropped all claims against me and the HOA. But the legal consequences for Patricia were just beginning. In November, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office filed criminal charges against her for fraud, theft, and embezzlement. The HOA board, now led by Susan as interim president, voted to cooperate fully with the investigation and to pursue civil charges to recover the misappropriated funds. I attended the criminal trial in January 2026. It was surreal sitting in the courtroom, watching Patricia try to defend herself against the overwhelming evidence. Her attorney tried to argue that she had simply made administrative mistakes, but the prosecution laid out a clear pattern of intentional misconduct. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus an additional $50,000 in penalties. As Patricia was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked at me with pure hatred. I felt no satisfaction, just relief that it was finally over. Michelle Carter recovered from her injury, though she walked with a slight limp. She actually reached out to me after the settlement and apologized for the lawsuit. She explained that her attorney had convinced her I was liable, and she had not known the full story about Patricia's misconduct. I appreciated the apology and bore her no ill will. She had been a victim in this situation too. The HOA underwent a complete restructuring. Susan stayed on as president and implemented new governance policies to prevent anyone from ever having that much unchecked power again. All board decisions now required documented votes, financial transactions required multiple approvals, and homeowners had much more transparency into how their money was being spent. As for my property, the gate stayed closed. Susan personally apologized on behalf of the HOA and assured me that no one would ever access my land without my permission again. The HOA even paid to upgrade my security system as a gesture of goodwill. I won my countersuit against the HOA for the bogus violation fines and harassment. They paid me $35,000 in damages and attorney fees. I used some of that money to add additional landscaping around my gate, creating an even more beautiful and private entrance to my property. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself and not backing down when you know you are right. It would have been easier to just let Patricia have her way, to avoid the conflict and the stress and the legal bills. But sometimes you have to fight, especially when someone is blatantly violating your rights and refusing to listen to reason. I also learned that documentation is everything. If I had not kept detailed records, installed those cameras, and preserved every email and letter, the case could have gone very differently. The evidence was what ultimately exposed Patricia's misconduct and protected me from liability. My attorney David became a good friend through this process. We still get lunch occasionally, and he always jokes that he should give me a referral fee because I gave him such an interesting case to work on. Barbara, my insurance attorney, did an incredible job defending me, and I made sure to send a glowing letter to her firm praising her work. Susan turned out to be a great HOA president. She actually cared about the community and wanted to do right by the homeowners, not just accumulate power. Under her leadership, the neighborhood became much more pleasant. People were friendlier, the board was responsive to concerns, and there was a genuine sense of community that had been lacking under Patricia's authoritarian regime. I even volunteered to help with some community projects, including a legitimate walking trail that the HOA built on actual HOA property with proper planning and liability insurance. It was nice to be part of something positive instead of constantly fighting battles. The drainage area where Michelle fell became a small memorial garden. With my permission and cooperation, the HOA installed some proper pathways and lighting in that area, making it safer. It was a compromise I was happy to make, now that people were actually asking for permission instead of just trespassing. My property values increased significantly after Patricia's removal. Turns out that having a dictatorial HOA president making arbitrary decisions and harassing homeowners was not great for the neighborhood's reputation. Once word spread that the HOA was under new, reasonable management, Sonoran Vista became a more desirable place to live. I ran into Frank Moretti at a neighborhood barbecue about 6 months after Patricia's sentencing. He apologized for going along with her schemes and admitted he had been intimidated by her aggressive personality. We were not going to be best friends, but at least we could coexist peacefully. Denise Cartwright moved out of the neighborhood entirely. I heard through the gossip chain that she was embarrassed about her association with Patricia and wanted a fresh start. I could not blame her for that. The whole ordeal took about a year of my life, consumed thousands of dollars in legal fees, even though I won reimbursement for most of it, and caused stress levels I would not wish on anyone. But in the end, justice was served. Patricia went to prison for her crimes, Michelle got compensation for her injury, and I got to keep my privacy and my property rights intact. I still live in that house today. Every time I drive through my gate and up that long private driveway, I feel grateful that I stood my ground. My home is my sanctuary, the place where I can escape from the world and just be myself. No one has the right to take that away, not even an HOA president on a power trip. The cameras are still there, though now they rarely capture anything more interesting than the occasional deer or coyote wandering through. The gate closes automatically after every entry, and the code is changed regularly just to be safe. I learned my lesson about security. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had just given in to Patricia's demands. Would Michelle still have gotten hurt? Would Patricia have continued her pattern of fraud unchecked? Would other homeowners have suffered under her increasingly authoritarian rule? I like to think that by fighting back, I did not just protect myself, but helped expose a serious problem that needed to be addressed. The local news covered Patricia's trial, and I was interviewed for one of the stories. I kept my comments brief and factual, but I made sure to emphasize the importance of HOA accountability and homeowner rights. Several people from other neighborhoods reached out to me afterward, sharing their own horror stories about HOA overreach and asking for advice. I pointed them toward resources and attorneys who could help. There is actually a growing movement in Arizona and other states to reform HOA laws and give homeowners more protection against abuse. I testified at a state legislative hearing about my experience, and some of the reforms being discussed would specifically address the kinds of things Patricia did. I'm not holding my breath for major changes. The HOA lobby is powerful, but at least people are paying attention to the issue. My family thought I was crazy for fighting the lawsuit instead of just settling. My brother kept telling me to take the deal and move on with my life, but I knew that settling would mean admitting fault for something I did not do, and it would mean Patricia got away with her misconduct. I could not live with that. My dad, on the other hand, supported me completely. He had fought his own battle with a corrupt contractor years ago and understood the principle of standing up for what was right. He came to several of the court hearings to show his support, and having him there meant a lot to me. I dated someone briefly during the middle of the lawsuit, and she could not understand why I was so invested in the case. She thought I should just pay the money and be done with it. We did not last long. I needed someone who understood that some things are worth fighting for, even when it is difficult and expensive. Looking back now, the whole situation seems almost surreal. How did a simple property dispute escalate into criminal charges and a trial? How did a homeowners association president think she could get away with such blatant misconduct? But I guess that is what happens when someone has a little bit of power and no accountability. They start believing their own authority is unlimited, and they stop seeing other people as having rights that deserve respect. The night Patricia was sentenced, I sat on my back patio, looking out at the mountains and thinking about everything that had happened. I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for a long time. The battle was over, and I had won. Not just in court, but in principle. I had proven that one person standing up for their rights could make a difference, even against an organization that seemed more powerful. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, my favorite Blanton's single barrel, and toasted to privacy, property rights, and justice. The desert sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, and for the first time in months, I felt completely relaxed in my own home. The legal bills were finally all paid. My insurance company had covered Barbara's fees, I had been reimbursed for David's work, and the countersuit settlement covered my other expenses. Financially, I came out slightly ahead, though the time and stress were costs no amount of money could fully compensate. I made some upgrades to the property after everything settled down. I added a new pergola on the back patio, expanded the pond into a larger water feature with a small waterfall, and planted several new trees to enhance the privacy screening. Each improvement made the property feel more like mine, more like the sanctuary I had envisioned when I first bought it. The relationship with the HOA stabilized under Susan's leadership. We were never going to be close friends, but there was mutual respect and open communication. When issues came up, they were handled professionally and fairly. It was what an HOA should be, a boring administrative body that maintains common areas and enforces reasonable rules, not a personal fiefdom for someone on a power trip. I also joined the board for a 1-year term, just to make sure the reforms Susan had implemented were being followed. It was tedious work, reviewing budgets and discussing landscaping contracts, but I felt an obligation to help protect other homeowners from ever experiencing what I went through. During my time on the board, we rewrote significant portions of the HOA covenants to clarify property rights and limit the board's authority. We added specific language about privacy, trespassing, and the requirement for explicit homeowner consent before the HOA could access private property for any reason. We also implemented term limits for board positions and requirements for financial transparency. These reforms were approved by an overwhelming majority of homeowners. Turns out most people had been unhappy with how Patricia ran things, but they had been too afraid or too apathetic to challenge her. Once she was gone and people saw that change was possible, they enthusiastically supported making the HOA more accountable. Michelle Carter and I actually became friendly acquaintances. She attended some HOA meetings after her recovery and was a vocal supporter of the reforms. She shared her perspective as someone who had been injured due to the lack of proper oversight and liability considerations. Her testimony was powerful and helped convince some of the holdouts who thought the reforms were unnecessary. The property where Michelle fell was eventually donated by me to the HOA as a permanent conservation easement. It would never be developed or altered, just maintained as a natural desert landscape. It seemed like a fitting resolution, turning the site of conflict and injury into something that benefited the whole community. I sometimes give talks at local real estate offices about HOA issues and homeowner rights. I share my story as a cautionary tale and encourage people to really read and understand their HOA covenants before buying property. I also emphasize the importance of staying involved in HOA governance, even when it seems boring or pointless. The problems happen when good people check out and allow petty tyrants to take control. My lawyer friends joke that I should write a book about my experience. Maybe someday I will. For now, I'm just enjoying living in my home, working on my hobbies, and appreciating the peace and privacy that I fought so hard to protect. The gate is closed, the cameras are watching, and anyone who wants to access my property knows they need to ask permission first. It is not complicated. It is just basic respect for property rights and human decency. As I sit here now, 3 years after Patricia's sentencing, I can honestly say that going through that nightmare was worth it. Not because I enjoyed the fight, but because I know I did the right thing. I protected my rights, exposed corruption, and helped make my community a better place. Those are things I can be proud of. The desert is beautiful tonight. The stars are bright in the clear Arizona sky, and my property is exactly what I always wanted it to be: peaceful, private, and mine. That is all I ever asked for, and thanks to standing my ground, that is what I have.